good to see you again. Thank you for coming. So today we are lucky enough to have Jack Rogers, who is a nature photographer. Jack is a prize-winning, widely established and published nature photographer who has been doing nature photography for decades. He was a teacher at Valencia and is recently retired. Congratulations, Jack. And he's been a lifetime supporter of Florida's, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, conservation organization. So you can actually see his pictures on pamphlets and signs all over. And actually, has anybody seen our Life Explorers graphic with the owl? Has anybody seen that? Well, if you've seen that, Jack actually took that picture and kindly let us use it. So you've already seen his photography. So today Jack will show us some of his nature photography. Also, he will share with you some tips of capturing your own photography. Even if you don't have a fancy camera, you can still use his techniques that he's going to show you even with your iPhone. So without further ado, Jack Rogers.
Alrighty, so started photography in high school. There was a girl in one of my classes and she had a cool camera and she was like in the camera club and sort of introduced me, and I couldn't afford a cool camera. I had like a 110 cheap little point and shoot, you know, that's where I started with. But what I figured out over time is all cameras are just a box with a hole in it, you know, and you just open the hole and let light in, right? And that's basically, so the techniques of photography are the same for whatever camera you have. So if you just use your phone, some of the things we'll talk about today will be applied to your phone, right? And I carry my phone every time I go out to do bird photography. I've got this, you know, professional sort of camera, but I have my phone in my pocket. And if the sun's coming up and it's a beautiful sunrise, well, I've got a 600 millimeter lens. It's not appropriate for landscape, but I pull out my phone and do a couple of sunrises, and I put it back and wait for the birds to show up. So some of the stuff we'll talk about, you'll be able to apply regardless of your level of photo expertise. And if you have questions at any time, technical questions about photography or real simple things about whatever you want to know, just, you know, throw your hand up and we'll talk. So the main idea, I guess, that I came to understand is photography is a great tool for introducing folks to things that, you know, you can say, hey, I'm going out to Merritt Island, it's really great, you should come sometime. And people go, yeah, okay, well, that's a long ways away, and, you know, I don't know. And then you show them a picture, and they go, oh, wow, that's beautiful, where's that at? I'd like to see that. And so the photos are a great tool for interesting people in nature, and then showing them what's around, what's available, and then, of course, then they go out themselves, and they become involved, and they realize the value and the importance of preserving these places, and they want to bring their friends and their family and their kids. So, you know, it's like the picture's worth 1,000 words. You can tell everybody all about that stuff, but you show them a photo, and it's much more valuable, much more effective. So I didn't really think I'm going to take photos to, you know, show my technique or present this technique of loving Florida and preserving Florida, but it just kind of happened, right? It just happened. So I share photos with friends and colleagues. I've got now what I call the bird spam list. People said, hey, send me a picture too. And so now a couple times a week I send out photos during the week, and they go all over the place, all over the country now, right? Just for fun, just because people enjoy seeing, you know, nature photos. But I'm also on Facebook and I'm on Instagram and I'm doing all that stuff too. And so that's a great tool for you if you are interested in learning about a new place. Of course, we're all more familiar with social media now. Just get on Facebook, type in the place you want to go. Somebody's been there, somebody's taken a photo, somebody's going to tell you about it. You can message with people. It's a wonderful tool for learning more about places and photo subjects. And you can say, hey, that's a great photo. How did you do that? And you can learn techniques, and, you know, so. I have learned that if you want to take a good photograph, you can't just go out and say, I hope something beautiful shows up in front of me today and I'll take a picture of it, right? You plan ahead, and planning ahead is by far the most important technique in photography. If I came to Mead Gardens in the middle of the day and it's hot and there's not going to be anything out, But if I get here early in the morning or somebody, maybe I look up Mead Gardens online and someone has a nice photo and I go, oh, what part of the park was that? So then I can go to that part of the park and I can be there at the right time of day when the light's nice. And so, all that planning ahead is really a valuable tool. The presentation I have here, is really going to show you some photos of different places that you can go and some representative species, birds and things that you can see at those places to kind of give you a feel for that, right? It's like a little peek into some of my very favorite places. And as we go along, we'll talk about photo techniques and that kind of stuff too. So again, throw your hand up. Any questions, just jump right in anytime here. When I first started teaching at Valencia, I teach science classes, or I did teach science classes. So it was earth science and oceanography. And then eventually I started teaching nature photography classes there too. But when I first got to Florida, I got the job at Valencia College. One of the first things I did is we're going to go out and explore. I want to go out and see all these great places. So there's Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. And I was very surprised that when I started teaching with my young students and talking to them, what I came to realize is that many of them never leave town. I mean, they live in a world that's a couple of blocks. Their house, where they work, and maybe school, and they don't even know that there's a National Wildlife Refuge 30 miles away. So I began to introduce them. I started doing field trips, and I would say, well, we're going to do earth science field trip, and we're going to look at this, this, and this, and I would take them out there. And then I would go out there and take photos, and we would, it all tied together. So using my photos in class to introduce them and then taking them out there. I had many students afterwards go, man, I'm so glad you took us out there. I've taken my family, I've taken my kids, it's just got to get them out there. People don't really know. So Merritt Island is one of the places that became a very favorite place for me. And it's marshes and wetlands. It really started out as just a big swamp. And NASA said, where can we fire rockets and if one blows up, nobody gets hurt? And that was Kennedy, Space Center. And then they realized, all this swamp around here is really valuable wetlands and it's full of wildlife. We can preserve this and we can make this a wildlife refuge too, and we can let the public have access to the parts that don't need to be secure. And so that's what it is. When you go on to Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, you can see the vehicle assembly building, and when they have the rocket launches, they restrict access, but it's a great place to go see that stuff too. But I go there for the wildlife and for the beautiful mornings and for the birds that are there. It's there's a little map, but basically you just drive in through Titusville, you go across the bridge, and you're in the park. And so I'm not going to spend any time with the map here, but lots to see and do there. As you drive in, I go there mostly for birds, so I want to be there at the site where the light is starting to shine across the water. I drove past this place hundreds of times, and I kept looking over there and seeing these mangroves and the sun coming over the water, and I just thought, I need to stop there one day. So one day I finally did. I stopped and took that picture. So you can take landscapes. There's marshes and wetlands, but there's lots of birds too. And it's really the birds are the fun thing for me. So here's the first technique. So if you want to take good photos of, any wildlife subject, you want to be at eye level. If I go out to the beach and there's some birds on the beach and I stand here and I shoot down at them, first of all, I'm photographing the top of their head, and then I'm also photographing all the mud and crud and everything else that's around them. But if I get down to eye level, then all that mud and crud disappears into just a thin line, and I'm shooting at eye level with the bird, and the background is further away, so it goes out of focus. So that's what this is. This is me laying with probably water on my belly, right at the edge of the water. Camera's 6 inches above the water, so my camera's just at the eye level of the bird. The reason the background's out of focus, you don't see the background, is because it's miles away. Because I'm no longer shooting down at the water, which is only a few feet away. I'm laying down like this. So if you can get at eye level with your subject, whether it's in a tree, which might mean you need one to get on a ladder or stand as high as you can, or if it's 6 inches above the ground, it puts the background out of focus, so it isolates your subject. Right? It's a really good idea, especially if your subject is not near like branches or background and those kind of things. Anyway, a little blue heron, and he's fishing. And what's kind of neat about these birds is they'll do that. They'll kind of freeze, they'll pause, and then they'll lunge quickly and go for their subject. Lots of wading birds in Florida, so lots of cool birds, and lots of interesting activity. At Merritt Island, there's this Black Point Wildlife Drive. You just basically drive into the refuge, turn left at the first fork. There's a sign that says Black Point Wildlife Drive, and it's a 7-mile drive through wetlands and marshes and those kind of things. And if you go there this time of year, it's really great because it hasn't rained much. The ponds and wetlands start drying up. The water gets concentrated in ponds, which means all the birds concentrate on the ponds, and that's what you get. You get hundreds and hundreds of birds, feeding together, squawking, and sometimes it's kind of difficult because there's so many birds you can't just get a photograph of. It's just a single bird. They're all in the image. But I just threw that in there just to show you how abundant the subjects can be. Winter at Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge is a great place to see lots of neat birds, and especially spoonbills if you like spoonbills. And if you get there really early and the water's really calm and you can get one isolated, you can get some amazing images. I actually took this before the sun had even risen just a few weeks ago. And, the sun comes up. You see the sky starting to get pink. There's no wind, so the water is mirror calm. The birds have been roosting in the water at night, so they're not moving yet. So I put my camera on a tripod and set it for very, very slow shutter speed. And then I set the exposure release for a 2-second delay. So I touched it. I backed away from the camera so that I wouldn't cause any vibration because I'm using such a slow shutter speed. And then 2 seconds later, the camera took the picture. So the water's mirror calm. The image is sharp. I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have held my camera and taken this picture because there was not enough light. Yes?
If you're using such a slow shutter speed, why is that bird standing so still? Because if you have slow shutter speed, you're not going to get that picture.
No, I didn't. But you have to have a very cooperative bird, don't you? So that's the deal. Early in the morning, the birds spend the night in the middle of the water, and they're sleeping. And they're out in the middle of the water because they can't be approached without being disturbed. No one can get to them, right? So he's basically just waking up. And so I took several photos of a wood stork. I took several photos of this bird. And some of them, just at the last second, you're hearing the camera go beep, beep, beep. And then all of a sudden the bird moves. And I'm like, well, okay, delete, right? And so it's not going to always work. But that's how I got that. Couldn't have got it without a tripod, and couldn't have got it without the time delay. Try it, and then, of course, a lot of times birds are just moving around, and you can get birds in action. Avocets migrate through. They're just at Merritt Island for a couple of weeks, but beautiful birds, and you can find those out there. Lots of ducks. Merritt Island, I think somebody said there's like, I don't know the number, dozens of different species. I think 17 maybe it's probably more than that, but a pintail duck. And then the spoonbills is what I really enjoy seeing is the spoonbills. They pond hop. So the ponds, you saw how all the birds were in one pond. They're all there, and then they sort of feed it until it's empty, and then they all go to another pond. And so they pond hop, and you can kind of follow the road with them. And this is one of them flying in. And I'm standing on the side of the road. The pond's right here. So I'm in the frame. He's more than filling the frame because that's how close I was, right? Of course, that's not with my pocket phone camera. That's with a longer lens, too long a lens in this case, but just to give you an idea for how close the birds will get. And what's really cool, what I really think is neat at Merritt Island is white pelicans spend the winter there. White pelicans actually don't live at the ocean, unlike our brown pelicans. They live in the big lakes of the Midwest, and they like Great Salt Lake, places up in the Midwest, but they come here during the winter. And they come here in huge groups. And they don't feed like brown pelicans where they dive out of the air. They swim in large groups like a big mob, and they just sort of herd fishes into groups, and then they scoop them up. But this time of year, they're all congregating together and fattening up, feeding together and fattening up, and they're about to leave. So you could get out there now and maybe still see them. I just took this about 2 weeks ago, and it was a neat. It was an opportunity for this photo because again, I'm sitting down at very low at the water, actually trying to photograph some ducks. And then the white pelicans started flying in. And literally 200 white pelicans flew eye level right past me. I've got the sun behind me, so the light's a nice light. And I just had, it was almost like, yeah, it was fun. It was a good morning, but and they're big. If you've ever seen a brown pelican, those are big birds, and white pelicans are 30% larger. So huge, big birds. It's really cool to be around them and see them. And you can see them in Merritt Island. And then there's lots of back roads. There's lots of trails. This is a killdeer, and you can see she's on eggs, so she's just actually stepping up. But they nest in gravelly, rocky areas and gravel roads. So what this bird has done is literally nesting on the road, and they spotted it, and so they put orange cones around it, right, to protect the area. And it raised its babies, and it hatched the eggs, and here's one of the babies. And eye level though, right? I'm laying down, and you can see the background's out of focus. And the only reason I could really get this, these birds are really, really active, and they just run all over the place. But it was a gravel road with water on one side and water on the other side. And so the nest was over here. So I just kind of laid on the side and just waited, for it to run within camera's view. If it had been about in a big wide open spot, it would have wandered off, and I wouldn't have gotten near it. And I don't like to, chase them. But again, you can see the value of shooting at eye level, how it isolates the subject. And there's trails. I think this is a white-eyed vireo, probably. That's what that is. You can walk the trails and find birds nesting. There's a scrub jay trail there in Merritt Island, and that's what that is. That's a Florida scrub jay, which is a very interesting bird. They're very gregarious. They're very habituated to people. They're used to the trails. They're one of those birds that once they get used to people, they realize, people often have food. And of course, the people realize that too, that if you have food, the birds they'll. So I've seen thousands, you've probably seen it too, thousands of pictures of these birds sitting on somebody's head. Because you go out there with the peanuts, and it's illegal, but people put a peanut on their head, the bird lands on their head, and their friend takes their picture. So I'm not recommending that as a technique, but they're very friendly birds. They're very used to people, and so you can see Florida's, and they're endemic. They're a species that only is found in oak scrub, and they have places. There's actually a scrub ridge trail there at Merritt Island. Orlando Wetlands. So this is a place that I used to think, it's a pretty nice place. It's a water treatment facility, which doesn't sound very natural or very inviting. But once the water is treated at the water treatment facilities, instead of just letting it go back to nature, they've built these ponds, and the ponds have different vegetation. It absorbs nutrients and contaminants, and by the time the water works from one pond to the next pond to the next pond, all the water is good to go then to be released back into aquifer. So that's a sort of a native, natural way of treating water that the water treatment folks use now. And so it's just this big, beautiful wetland setting. And there's different types of vegetation. There's ducks, and there's alligators, and opportunities for pretty things. This is the overview map. They've recently built a boardwalk there. And so I used to like to go to Orlando Wetlands, but a lot of times I thought, I wish the ponds were smaller so the birds and the other wildlife would be closer. And now they've built this boardwalk that goes by one of the islands. And right now, wading birds are nesting there. Lots of spoonbills nesting there, great egrets and wood storks. And it doesn't show the boardwalk on here, but as you go into the Orlando Wetlands, you just take the first right, and it goes right to the boardwalk, and it's really a great place. And this is what the boardwalk looks like, and it's very comfortable. You walk through there. If you're shy about gators, well, they don't get them on the boardwalk, so you can be really close to the gators, and close to nature. This time of year, that's what you see. There are sandhill cranes. I was just the other day out there photographing sandhill cranes. The little baby sandhill cranes are called colts, and they toddle along. And again, these birds are very comfortable with people, so you can go see and photograph sandhill cranes. And you could do that with your phone, because there's gravel roads, water on one side, water on the other side. The sandhill cranes will just wander along through there. They're used to people. They're not scared at all. I've been pecked by sandhill cranes, actually, because I was by the water, and I got the light, just right, and they're over here, and I'm photographing them, and then I realize, they're coming near me, and then I'm kind of trapped by the water, you know, and the birds are coming by, and the parents, they don't growl exactly, but they kind of rumble in their throat like, you know, stay where you're at, I'm with my chicks, and don't do anything. And then I'm just like this, and then all of a sudden, everybody give me a couple of pecks, right? And it's, just let me know that they're coming through, and you know. But anyway, not nervous about you, and you can photograph that scene if you want. This was taken from the boardwalk the other day. That's a pair of spoonbills on their new nest. Lots of neat perches there. That was, again, a spoonbill on that same island right from the boardwalk, probably 15 feet away from it. There's great blue herons nesting out here. Here's a great blue heron landing with a stick. It's always a really fun to watch these guys because it's a big ceremony. The male, typically the male goes out, he finds a stick. You see him flying back the stick. You might get some pictures of him flying with the stick. And then the female perks up and she goes, oh, you know, thank you for bringing the beautiful stick. And they hand her the stick and they both take turns. They help each other putting it down. And then sometimes she rewards him. You know, they have a little mating session and then he goes off to get another stick. And it's pretty cool to watch. Spoonbills do the same thing. The great egrets do. All those big wading birds, they have that same sort of behavior, which is lots of fun to see. Again, another photo from the boardwalk. One of the important things about photo techniques is I always tell students, point your shadow. So if you imagine being in a photo studio, then the photographer's here, and the photographer has a big bank of lights here, and the subject is in front, and the lights are positioned perfectly so there's even illumination of the subject. Well, you can do that in nature, but you don't carry a bank of lights. You have the sun. And you make sure that when you're doing photography, as much as possible, the rule is, have the sun behind you so it's shining on your neck. It's going to turn you into a redneck, right? It's going to shine on the back of your neck if you're there doing this regularly. And it's going to shine over your shoulder onto your subject. And it's going to leave a shadow. Your shadow is going to go straight toward your subject. All right, so if you're pointing your shadow at your subject, you know you have the right light angle. And that means that there's no shadows on your subject. If the sun was over here, then one side of the bird would be lit up very bright, and there would be shadow. The other side would be in shadow. So that's very harsh looking, and that's not very attractive. And so you don't see a shadow, well, the wing. Underneath the wing, because the sun's up here, and so the wing is shadowed, but the rest of the bird, there's not a shadow on it. And the water's calm out here, and I had been watching it feed for a while, and then I knew, well, eventually it was going to take off and fly. So I put myself, so when it did fly, the sun would be behind me shining on the bird, and that's how that photo happened. So two rules then today that you've learned so far, I hope you remember. If you can just do that, point your shadow, keep the sun behind you, shining on your subject, right? And the other is shoot at eye level as much as you can. If you need to get lower or if you need to get higher to keep at eye level, it's more natural perspective. Purple gallinules, ragweed blackbirds. There's lots of nice, fun, cool birds to see out in the wetlands areas. At Orlando Wetlands, there's lots of vultures. I'm not sure why they like it so much out there, but here's a bunch of them having a meeting over who gets the last pickings of a turtle. Red-shouldered hawk eating a snake. And, you know, you just walk and you just keep your eyes open. Yes, sir?
I noticed in most of your pictures, not all of them, but most of them, you have very little depth of field. How wide open are you shooting with your lens and what focal length?
So, again, he's talking about the fact that everything is out of focus except for the bird, right? The back. So there's a term called depth of field, which is how much distance from your camera sensor is in focus. Like I'm taking a picture of that table, then I could set adjustments on the camera, the opening of the camera called the f-stop, that would open up or close, and it would adjust the amount of area that was in focus. If I had it really, really tiny, that would change the depth of field, and I could have it so that the floor was in focus, and the front of the table was in focus, and the back of the table was in focus, and the wall was in focus. But I don't really want the wall in focus, right? I don't want the background. So I open up the camera more, and that diminishes the depth of field. So now it's just the table that's in focus. So there's two ways to do that. One thing is, If the background is close, then lots of times, it's hard to have it out of focus because it's too close and your depth of field is too broad. So there's two things you do. You open up the lens as wide as you can to get the right exposure, but you also try to find subjects where the background is very far away. And then you shoot at eye level again. But typically it's the lens I'm using a lot is 5.6 is the maximum opening. If that number doesn't mean anything to you, it doesn't matter really, but basically you can control that depth of field. So the bigger the opening, the smaller the depth of field is. So I usually maybe stop down one stop, but mostly I look for subjects where the background is a long way away, right? Wakota-Hatchie wetlands. People have lots of interesting ways of pronouncing that. I think I said it right, but a lot of people just say Waco or Wacko. And it's another one of the water treatment facilities. It's down near Delray Beach, so it's a couple hours south of here. But really nice because it's not really big, but it has elevated boardwalks throughout. So, you can always stay on a nice civilized boardwalk, and you can lean there, use the edge of the boardwalk as a support for your camera, so you don't necessarily have to carry a tripod. A little map shows it, but lots of, again, great blue herons nest there, and Anhinga's nest there, wood stork's nest there. There's part of the greeting dance that I was talking about. She's like, oh yeah, really nice stick. Here, let me help you with that stick. And lots of wading birds flying. You're on an elevated boardwalk, and so there's lots of trees there that then are at your eye level. So the birds fly right by you, right? And here again, this is no shadows on that bird, right? Because I've positioned myself so where are the birds flying? They're flying here. Okay, let me get in a position so the sun's behind me, so when they fly, I'll have the nice illumination on the bird. Hawks. Here's again another eye level photo of a black-crowned night heron. There's purple gallinule, which are really beautiful birds. I mean, if I see a spoonbill, I don't care where it's at, I photograph it, And if I see a purple gallinule, pretty much the same deal.
What kind of shutter speed do you normally use when the birds are in motion? Like that last picture of the bird flying?
So that's a great question. So typically when I'm out and about, and I have nice camera gear and stuff, right? But so my camera will, if there's plenty of light, the maximum shutter speed is 1/8,000th of a second. If you can imagine an exposure that short, that's crazy. It's hard for me to even conceive. But what I've discovered over time is, rarely you're going to have that much light that's going to allow you to get a well-exposed photo at that fast shutter speed. But how much shutter speed do you need? For a bird like a great blue heron or an eagle or a spoonbill, big birds that don't fly that fast, 1/1250th, right, is the sort of the minimum shutter speed you're looking for. If you can go 1/2000th or 1/2500th faster than that, but 1/1250th is the minimum shutter speed. If you're using your camera phone, then you get what you get, right? But typically, if you're using your camera phone, you're going to be out during the day when it's fairly comfortable, and normally you'll have enough shutter speed that will typically stop the action. And then other birds, lots of other things. One thing to remember is that a lot of times you're out in nature and you never know what you'll come across. So there could be some really wild, stuff going on out there. Yeah, I couldn't resist that photo, right? Another interesting place, closer to home, Gatorland. Have you guys been to Gatorland? Gatorland has been around for a long time. It's kind of a old Florida tourist attraction. They have the gator jumperoo, where they dangle chickens for the gators, and they jump up and grab chickens, and it's all this kind of fun stuff, right? But there's a big, what they call the breeding marsh, ponds there, and they just let gators in the ponds, and they swim around, and they have male and female, and they build nest mounds, and it's where gators are interacting naturally. And there's vegetation and foliage all around there. Well, gators are a great protective mechanism for nesting birds. There's not going to be any possums, any bobcats, any raccoons. There's not going to be anything else in there because the gators are there and they're going to eat them. So the birds recognize that. And so the birds come in and nest all around the boardwalk. So you can see there's the boardwalk, right? And that's photographers all photographing nesting birds. And there are many places where the vegetation is much closer to the boardwalk than that, but the birds are just there. And they are protected, and they're used to people because there's big crowds come through there. St. Augustine Alligator Farm in St. Augustine is another place like this, but the birds are habituated, they're used to people, they nest at eye level, they're very comfortable. Yes, ma'am?
So I know that azalea gardens here have the same species of birds. Do you have a preference to do it here or in azalea, or is it that, because I know they're roosting at the moment?
I've been over there, and well, one of the nice things about Gatorland is it's elevated. They have a birds nesting at eye level and much closer to you. Azalea Gardens is not a bad place. I mean, there's lots of places that I'm not mentioning, but what's great about this is they have a photographer's program, so you can, on weekends, show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, you go to the back gate, you pay them $20, or you can get a pass, but if you just want to do it one time, you can get in early. You'll get in there for a couple hours before any of the other crowd is in there. The sun's just coming up. You have very nice light. There's no crowds. You're not fighting with anybody. You can be on this elevated boardwalk, and I'll just show you some of the pictures you can get, which, shows you the value, right? So that's golden sunlight shining on the foliage behind this bird. And the green around the eyes, that's fleshy area. It's called the lores. That's part of their breeding plumage. Their hormones activate their breeding plumage. They get those really long, white, delicate, frilly feathers. The eyes turn bright red. The lores turn bright green. This is a great egret, but eye level, right? And very comfortable with me. Not at all worried about me being too far or too close. This is a cattle egret. You've seen cattle egrets all over the place on the side of the road, and they just kind of look white and kind of scruffing around in the grass. But you can see how beautiful they get, that red on the bill, and then the purple lore, and then the bright red eye. Most of the time it's just a yellow bill, a yellow eye, and this is what they look like. So, and then frilly foliage, the plumage, that I was talking about. This is a great egret. Doesn't quite have the colors around its eye, but you can see it's put on the plumage. And then, of course, what's cool is they're nesting, so they're going to have babies. Yes, sir?
If you shoot manual at, say, 1/8,000 and 5.6, do you let the camera set the ISO automatically?
No, I never do that. I always control everything, because it doesn't matter if you set the shutter speed for 1/8,000th and it's dark, then your camera is going to put your ISO to like 1/50,000th, right? So when you get the picture, it's going to be nasty grain, right? So I usually use the lowest ISO that I'm comfortable. And so ISO is a technical term if you're a photography person that refers to how the sensitivity of the sensor. If you have a lower ISO, your sensor uses a lower sensitivity. You need more light, but it gets really great detail and perfect, imaging and color, and everything's perfect. And the higher the ISO, the crummier the picture looks. It gets grainy and it doesn't have as much detail and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't let cameras make any decisions. I figure I'm smart enough to do all that stuff, so I just, set the ISO as low as I can, and then I use the shutter speed to stop the action, and then the f-stop to help me with the light. Yes, sir?
I'm looking at the pictures, they're great, but I infer that you do your own processing, one, and two, you do a lot of cropping.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, it depends on where you're at, but you're right. And there's not a photo that I ever took that I didn't open up in Photoshop, crop for composition, adjust exposure. That's what you do in a darkroom, right? And that's what you do with photos, right? So a painter doesn't just go like, I'll take a picture of anything and I don't care about the composition. You use cropping as a composition tool, right? And sometimes with the modern cameras, they have these sensors that have 50 megabytes of data in one tiny little, right? So it's really equivalent to like 10 photos that you used to take with the camera. So you can take a photo and crop 50% of the photo and still have huge, great detail. It's like zooming in inside the camera. So yeah, you use the tools that are available for sure. babies are born, and then you get this action, right? I think I made a caption for this once, and I called it, "Why Great Egrets Hate Their Kids." What they do is the wading birds go out and they catch fish and they swallow them, and then they come back to the nest, and then the babies grab the bills, and that stimulates regurgitation, and then the adults spit up the fish, and then the babies can eat them. But sometimes it's violent. It's like the babies are attacking their parents. And the bigger the babies get, the crazier it gets. It'll be like the parent will land, and then the babies all go crazy, and chasing them all through the rookery, right? And the parents are like, "I want to feed them, but I'm scared of them." It's like it's... Yes, sir.
If you go out during the day, do you take the tripod most of the time, or leave it in the car?
I always take the tripod. Yeah. I don't use it for flight shots. So flight shots, I set the 1/1250th or higher shutter speed. Generally, when you're photographing birds that are flying, they're far enough away so the depth of field isn't an issue. So I'm usually wide open, or maybe stop down one stop, right? And then the ISO, I'll adjust for whatever the light conditions are, but as low as I can get it, right? And then I'm just hand holding with a high enough shutter speed that, and of course, the birds might have a blurred wingtip or whatever, and but any other time I'm using a tripod, right? There's no way that I can ever hold the cameras as steady as a tripod will, right? And so use the tool, right? And actually, I have a little mini tripod. It's really a pistol grip tripod head that's made to go on a top of tripod, but I just use that, and I crawl along. I'm low crawling, literally, with holding that pistol grip, and when I get to where I want to be, I still have a little tripod for support. Yes, sir?
Another thing that I've heard and do myself, have for years, when you're taking your shot, and generally where you want to focus to get your best shot is on the eye.
Right.
You focus on the eye, and everything else is good.
For sure. Yeah, when you look at somebody, you look them in the eye. And if you take a portrait of a person, you look at their eye. And it could be that the tip of the nose is out of focus. You don't want that to be the case, but you won't notice it. Ears can be out of focus, you don't even care, right? But you want the eyes to be in focus. So as much as possible, if you're close enough to focus on the eye, you do. If you're further away, then it's the face, right? But that's where you look, whether it's a portrait of a bird or your dog or your cat, right? Yes, sir?
Will you take a monopod over a tripod at any point?
A lot of folks do. I don't. I'm just used to using my tripod, but it's a little less awkward for some folks. A lot of folks don't like a tripod because they're like, "Oh, it's so hard, you gotta, But once you get used to using it, then you forget about it, right? It just becomes part of what you naturally do. So again, eye level nests 10 feet away. That's the fun thing about Gatorland. This is, again, babies reaching down mom's gullet to try to find some fish. Wood storks nest there, and Hinga's displaying, and then lots of little birds flitting around through the foliage. And of course, if you're at Gatorland, there's gators. And I go there for the birds, but every once in a while you get trapped, and it's like weather's not so good, and it's rainy, and I got up under the gazebo, and so here now I'm reduced to photographing gators in the rain. But it's kind of fun. What I really like to do is go to places that have photogenic settings. And I want, as much as possible, to photograph the subject with a background that's a long ways away. And then I want a background, if it's foliage, that's green and lush and healthy, rather than crumpled dead reeds in a swamp, So I'm always looking for places where there's a nice scenery, a nice setting. And so beaches are great. And if they're big, wide sand beaches, then you can lay down low, and you get whitish stripe, and then you get the blue skies or the blue water. A lagoon might just be surrounded by sand, or it might have mangroves in the background, but they'll be a long ways away. One of my really favorite beaches to go to is Fort DeSoto Park, which is over, it's on a little island just before you cross the bridge on the other side of Tampa to go further south. Fort DeSoto Park, it's a wonderful park, it's well maintained. It's got lots of big white sand beaches, lots of lagoons, lots of seabirds, and lots of wading birds. And it's a place where you can see reddish egrets pretty regularly. And reddish egrets are really cool because they're these big wading birds that vigorously, aggressively, almost crazily stumble and run through the water chasing fish. So they're great fun to watch, and they're great fun to photograph, and that's a place where you can see them. So here's what it is. It's just this big island, and on one end of the island there's East Beach, and you can watch the sunrise come up on East Beach, and if you stick around the whole day, then you can go to North Beach and watch the sun go down. So you can get sunrises and sunsets over the water there. Meanwhile, you can spend the day at all these neat places. This is East Beach right here. That's a picture of it with the seaweed washed up and stuff. So that's not the most attractive version, but I took this picture into the sun as sun was not quite rising yet. And I'm not facing directly at the sun, but you can see the pretty color and the big white pelicans there. Eye level again, I noticed that's one of the things I'm always looking for, is to try to isolate the subject, so you look at the subject and you forget about everything else. And so there's a black-bellied plover just a month or two, a few weeks maybe, before it migrated north, but he's starting to put on that very pretty plumage, preening. This photo, if the average person who wasn't really thinking about getting an eye level had taken this photo, it's just mud. It's just nasty mud. So if I just walked over there and took a photo down at it, it'd be this little brown bird and a whole bunch of mud around it. But I'm laying in the mud, I'm getting muddy, which, I dress appropriately, right? And you see the little light in its eye. That's because that's the sun. So, and you can't see his shadow because his shadow is like 400 feet long, because the sun's down here and he's only 6 inches tall, but the sun is no shadows on him at all, right? Nothing. All you see is the glint in his eye. So that's where you can turn a not so attractive photo into a beautiful photo if you're using the right light angle and you're using the right perspective, right? Same thing here. This bird wasn't in the mud, but he was in the grasses. But again, you can see the sunlight in his eye, a little droplet on his bill being lit by the sun, and in the background, it would be all grass. But now that has disappeared because I'm low again. And there's kind of the same thing. But this is from East Beach in the morning. I got there that morning and I thought, the sun hasn't risen yet, and I didn't have quite the color yet, but as the sun started coming up, that's the look, that's the bridge that takes you across from Tampa further south, Skyline Bridge. And lots of photographers go there, but that's kind of gives you an idea. This is North Beach, lagoons, and the backgrounds are farther away, so lots of good opportunities. This is a reddish egret, but this is the white wolf. This is an unusual occurrence of this bird with white plumage. This one's in breeding plumage, so he has the pink lore, and just a real pretty bird. And that's an example. They throw their wings up to make shadows, right? They run around, they scare all the fish like crazy, then they throw their wings up, and it makes a shadow on the water, and the fish swim up under the shadows, and then they eat them. So it's pretty effective. Another eye level photo. You see this bird all the time, and it doesn't look all that attractive, but if you get down nice and low, you can turn it into a pretty nice photo opportunity. One of my very favorite birds, you can see these guys, oyster catchers, just pretty looking and unique looking birds, and they're there. Another eye level photo. I'm probably getting a little wet here, but and again, you can see I'm just repeating this over and over, but you can see how nice the photos look. If you can, somebody asked me about that. I've heard many people who, especially many of the folks I talk to, they're photographers who have lots of money. They're in their retirement ages, and they're like, I don't really want to lay in the mud, and it's really not hard to get down there to do that. Of course, the hard part is getting back up, right? So there's a point where I'm going to try that, but come with me so you can help me get back up. A place where you can go where you don't have to do all that. You can just get in a boat, and is Lake Toho. Kaliga, I don't know how to say it, Lake Toho, and Lake Kissimmee, which are south of St. Cloud. And the reason these are nice is because there are eagles nesting around there, but also, thank you, I'm glad Sony knows what's going on here. Yeah, snail kites. So you can go to the various marinas. There's pontoon boats, there's guys that you can just Google it, snail kite tours on Lake Toho or Lake Kissimmee, and there's several folks doing that, and they'll take you out, to the limits of the areas where the snail kites are at, and they're beautiful, just wonderful looking birds. and they're rare, they're endangered, and they're protected, and they're serious about protecting them. So there's signs up, and but the birds don't worry too much about where the signs are at, so you can get good opportunities to photograph snail kites. And they're snail kites because they eat snails, right? So they're getting those apple snails. And actually, there's an invasive snail that's worked its way into the lakes, and they're bigger. And so it's you always think of invasive species as being an issue, harmful to native species, but because they're big and juicy, the snail kites are doing really good now. And there's that, she's sitting on the side of a sign saying, yep, this is the end of the area that you're allowed to come into. I seem to be on the wrong side of the sign, but I wasn't driving the boat. And there's other birds out there too. This was sometimes it's amazing to watch great blue herons and some of the other wading birds and what they can eat. That bird swallowed that fish whole, right? Threw it around a little bit, and it went down head first and left a big lump in it as it was going down. An eagle's nest, if you've seen an eagle's nest, they're huge, big nests, and there's several of them, and they nest in different places around there. So, you can get photos like that. So that's a cropped image, right? But I'm probably 75 feet away, and you have to kind of get back to cut the angle down so you're not just shooting straight up at it. But it's fun to see eagles nesting and feeding their young. Further down in that direction, in South Florida, below South St. Cloud, there's a place called Joe Overstreet Road. It's just a road that runs out to Lake Kissimmee. And it's just a farm road, and there's cattle on either side of the road. And I go there because there's fence lines. And a lot of people do this, right? You just drive the road and look at the fence and see who's perched on the fence. And you're out in the prairies, so there's caracara. I don't know if you know about caracara, but they're these really unique looking, they're falcons, but they're sort of terrestrial birds. They perch, and then they'll hop down, and they'll walk around, and they'll flip over cow pies and whatever, and they're just looking for whatever they can get. They're scavengers. You'll often see them with vultures on the side of the road, but it's one of the few places where you can fairly reliably see them. Right? So I like to go Joe Overstreet, and I'll just drive along slowly, and I look at every fence post. Is there a little black dot on that fence post? Let me make sure I've got the light behind me, and let me just see what I see. And there's bobwhite on the fence post, and there's meadowlarks on the fence post, and there's swallows and all kinds of little birds on the barbed wire in between. And this is a young shrike. And then you don't have to just photograph them on the fence post. Here's, guess what I'm doing? Lying on my stomach, right? Eye level. And you can see again how the foreground's out of focus, the background's out of focus, and a little glint in its eye because the light's nice because it's early in the morning. And you would guess sandhill cranes would be out there. And here's one doing a little dance for its mate, and sandhill cranes flying by, and eagles flying by, and snail kites with snails. So you can see that bird had reliably found a place that it liked to feed, and it flew out and got a snail and came back and ate the snail, and then flew out and got us another snail. So I had, I don't know if this is a female or a young snail kite because they have this similar plumage, but it's nice when you can observe a bird's behavior and predict it and put yourself in the right spot, and that's kind of what happened here. There's a limpkin out there and all the typical wading birds. What happens is when you drive Joe Overstreet, at the end of the road, you're at a boat ramp. So you can sort of hang out the boat ramp and see what action is happening there too. But the fun part for me is driving the road. There's a species of owl in Florida called a burrowing owl. It's about that tall. It lives in the ground with the gopher tortoises, right? They dig burrows. They're terrestrial. There's a few places where they are, they're another endangered species, but there are a few places where they're reliably, you can see colonies of them. They live in colonies. They'll dig burrows. There'll be 7 or 8 birds at each burrow. The places where you can find them, you can spot them because there'll be perches. The state and the city or the county or whomever is responsible for those areas will put perches up, and they'll often cordon them off with ropes and signage. Cape Coral is a great place to see burrowing owls. And you know, once you see them, you're like, yeah, I got to go there. I can't resist that. So there's a map, but here's what you see, just these little owls, right? And the perches they put out, this is a branch, but a lot of times you'll just see them on these little crosses, right? And a lot of times the perches are white polypropylene, so not the most attractive perch, but they'll be on the ground, they'll be by their burrows. They're real fun to watch, and they'll make faces and twist their heads around and line up and stare at you and hop in and out, and yeah, but again, they live right in neighborhoods. There's Pelican ball fields in Cape Coral. It's a big series of athletic fields, and people around there, have burrowing owls visiting them all the time. In fact, I was kind of surprised because this one guy had a mailbox across. He lived across the street, and I guess he was tired of them landing on top of his mailbox and pooping on the mailbox, right? So he put some frilly stuff on there so they wouldn't land on there. And I was like, I'd be just the opposite. I'd be putting a platform, come to my house, right? But anyway, there's lots of those guys. Oops, I'm just jumping along here. And so what there also are monk parakeets. That's what these are. Lots of, and further south you get in Florida, the more exotic birds and animals. The iguanas, for instance, the green iguanas. There's lots of invasive species that have become established. And these guys are colonial birds, so they build huge nests, and they build them in the trees, but they build them on the ball field light stanchions, and they build them in the power lines and all over the place. And real noisy, but lots of fun, very gregarious, and you can see those there too. And there's a interesting place south of here that I like to go to. This is yes?
Jen, on the previous pictures, I've been noticing what shutter or speed do you use, because the feathers look almost like as if they were painted. They're so beautiful.
Well, it's more about technique and equipment. If you want really, really good detail, you want to be as close as you can. You want to have a lens that will magnify your subject to fill it so you're not having to do a lot of cropping. You want to be very stable when you capture the exposure so you're not shaking the camera. You want to use a high enough shutter speed to eliminate shutter, or use a tripod, which again, I was using a tripod here. So all that goes into it. But typically you think, I'm gonna take a picture, you go click. And no, that's not the way it goes. You have a tripod, you're watching your subject, and you're slowly squeezing that shutter so that sometimes it surprises you when it actually trips the shutter. So there's a whole lot to that. And you get, when you first see a subject for the first time, you're not as cognizant of all that stuff. You're like, I got to get a picture of this, right? But after a while, you think, okay, I want better pictures. Now what do I need to do? But careful shutter release, stable platform as you can make it. And if you don't have a tripod, then you get used to really holding yourself stable and being very careful about that. Faster shutter speed, good sharp lens, right? The truth is that every camera is the same. They're just boxes with holes in them. But it's the lens that really makes the difference, the quality lens. And that's why they're rare. When you start looking at bigger lenses, you go like, that's really expensive. Yeah, and that's what all the professionals are using, and they're getting great photos, and that's why they're doing that. So it depends on what you're going to do with your photos. The average camera that you can go into Best Buy right now and buy are so good that you could use it for years and years and years with the lenses that it comes with and take great photos. But then at some point, you realize, well, maybe I can step up a little bit. So it just depends on how addicted you get to it all, right? South of here, there's a place people typically call Stick Marsh, but it's formerly T.M. Goodwin Wildlife Management Area. And what's neat about it is this little road goes by this canal, and you can go out to where these ponds are, and there's a boat launch there. But there's a little island, and this is the island right here, and that's actually a rookery for lots of wading birds, but spoonbills, specifically spoonbills. So I go there, and the spoonbills fly from the island across the canal, and they're grabbing sticks, and then they fly back with sticks. So you just park on the parking lot. There's a public bathroom right here. and the birds are flying by you. So you're at eye level, you know, you go there in the morning, the sun's behind you, and then the bird flies by with a stick and you take a photo. And then it flies back to get another stick. And it flies by with another stick. Sometimes it'll land in front of you, right? Wings flared, making a pit stop. Get there really early in the morning. Sometimes the background is dark, so you can get stuff like that. You know, you can see even the color of the bird is a little different, right? It's because the sunlight is just coming up, and the light is still golden orange, but the background's in shadows. So, and there's cattle egrets out there, and so he's flying for a stick. He's flying back with a stick. Another one with a stick. Oh, black-crowned night heron going for a stick. Got a stick. And then eventually, you know, babies are born. And so this is a young spoonbill. And if you're familiar with spoonbills, when you look at an adult spoonbill, especially in breeding plumage, bright red shoulders and bald, ugly green heads, right? But the babies, when they're born, have plumage. They have feathers on their heads. So their colors are more pink, and they have black wingtips. So that's what identifies this. But they're real pretty, and they're not, the birds here, again, there's the airboat launching ramp there. So, I mean, they've seen boats and constructions and fishermen and people all over the place, so they just don't have any fear of people. So here's a baby that basically landed on the shoreline right in front of me and said, okay, I'm going to preen. And again, you can see the black tip and the feathered head that shows you that's a young one. So that's a really great place. It's very convenient. I mean, if you have any issues at all with health or mobility or whatever, you just park your car, you get out of your car, and you take pictures of birds flying by. So it's really good. Although you have to drive down like a 5-mile-long, bumpy, gravelly road to get there, but once you get there, it's pretty cool. And this is the time of year to go, right? March, April, May, June. June, they're having babies, right? And then by July, it's all over. But so it's a good time. There's another place south of here. If you go down toward Tampa, near Lakeland, there's Circle B Bar Reserve. And there's another place that it started out as a ranch, but the ranch sold it to the county or the state, I'm not sure. And they turned it into one of those water management facilities. So they built some berm roads that separate the water in the area into different impoundments. And that's what it looks like. It's just gravel roads, and you can walk it. And, lots of interesting wildlife. The pileated woodpeckers with some babies right up near the area. Limpkin, springtime, baby limpkin. Birds in the shrubs, catbird, red-winged blackbird. If you're out there, you never know what you see, but you've seen lots of great egrets, but it's always fun to get a great egret with a frog. Ducks, black-bellied whistling ducks, and then the wildlife is fairly tame, so you get raccoons hanging out with you. And bobcat, if the one I've seen bobcat at Merritt Island, I've seen them in Apopka, but almost never in a photographable setting, right? Just like I want to photograph bobcat, and it was at Circle B that I got my first really good bobcat photos. And this bobcat was feeding. There was tall grass, and he was feeding in the grass, chasing mice. And I could tell you chasing mice could be like jumping, right? I never saw it catch a mouse, but it stayed within 20 feet of me for a half hour, right? And it was hard to photograph because actually the grass was as tall as the bobcat. But every once in a while he would climb out onto a stump or a fallen tree. And that's where I got that photo, when it was looking down, looking for moving grass so it could catch a mouse. And then all these places have alligators, right? You can't go near water in Florida and not expect to see some alligators. There are roads at Circle B that they closed this time of year, which is the breeding season, because the gators get more aggressive. And I don't know that they've had an attack out there, but they don't want that to happen either. If you go out to the wetlands areas now and you're out there in the mornings, a lot of times you'll hear roaring. And it's like, what, do they got dinosaurs here? And it's these alligators, and the big alligators can roar like a dinosaur. And they arch, they're laying in the water, they stick their heads up out of the water, they stick their tails out, their back is arched, and they just let air vibrate through their body. And you can see droplets of water just bouncing up off these alligators. And it's just an interesting, almost scary thing to see. I photographed one the other day. My wife didn't go with me, so I was out at Orlando Wetlands, and I saw an alligator, and it was in the waters, and I'm on the boardwalk, so I could get as close as I want, and it was roaring, and water was flying, and so I took a video with my phone, pulled it out, and I sent it to her, and she says, "You better get out of there, you know." But, you know, I'm up on the boardwalk, so it's a neat thing to see. And I just say all that because this is a big boy. This was an alligator that was so big that as it walked across the berm road in front of me, as it came out, its head was in the other side before its tail came out here. I mean, it was 10 or 11 foot long, 12 foot, I don't know, big alligators. And they're doing a high walk. You know, alligators mostly will crawl on their belly, but they can step up and walk like that. And so they have a variety of ways to motivate themselves. So anyway, we're at Mead Gardens. And so what about Mead Gardens? So I live in Oviedo. And I typically, like I said, like to go to places where there's open, photogenic settings, and I really like wetlands areas and beach areas. And I don't come to places like Mead Gardens too much because it's difficult to photograph birds that are flitting through the trees, and when they do land in the trees, there might be little branches in front of them, or there'll be shadows from branches in front of them, and that stuff. So it requires a little bit more effort and patience. But I came here the other day, I thought, well, if I'm at Mead Gardens, I was in Winter Park. Let me go over there and just do a little walk around. And it's during the middle of the day. It wasn't the best time for light. But, you know, I just went into the woods over here by the cycads, and I just went by the pond, and I went through by the boardwalk, and then I walked along the stream, and then I went by the other pond over here, and I came out into the grass and saw lots of cool stuff. So I just did some photography. I had a 200 to 600 millimeter lens and a mirrorless camera and a tripod, so these pictures might be a little different from what you'll get, but you can do that same thing and you can see, you know, some pretty interesting stuff, right? So, of course, squirrels. And squirrels are interesting because they're inquisitive, so they'll watch you as much as you watch them. This is a Carolina wren, which was hunting around on the boardwalk and just perfectly happy for me to be there, so I was able to photograph the Carolina wren. Another squirrel, he'd finished hunting and was just taking a little nap, so he just sat there and let me pose around, you know. Again, as much as possible, I'm trying to get backgrounds that are out of focus, right? So, the squirrels, you can't always do that because there's foliage all around him, but he was on a branch, and I was able to put myself in a position where no shadows on him, and the background was far enough away that it was out of focus. And, you know, there's turtles in the pond, which what you expect. I walked past the pond, and over there where you open up into the grassy area, there's lots of foliage and there's lots of warblers right now. Warblers are about this time of year start to head out. I think they'll be migrating out of here in another month or so, but right now there's palm warblers and pine warblers and yellow warblers. And I don't know, to me they're all like little green yellow birds. I have a hard time figuring out what they are, but that's what that was. That one was feeding for a while, then it stopped and preened for a little while. And you can see it's hard to get a really clean picture, but I got at least the background behind him was not so cluttered. And it was interesting because while I was chasing the warblers around, because I've got my tripod and the lights, you know, there's it's a little more work. You got to have patience, and that's really, I don't do that a lot, but I'm chasing the warblers around, and I got several good photos. And then I heard something crumpling through the weeds, and I'm like, what's that? And just crackling, you know, and I looked around, and there was a box turtle, and he was about this big, and he was just tooling along, and the weeds were crackling, and so actually I got my very first good photos of a box turtle here the other day, right over there on the edge of the grassy area, and it worked its way into the non-grassy area, and then it tooled off into the woods. So I was happy with that. Another little warbler. Any bird folks here? What kind of warbler is that? Pine warbler, maybe?
Yellow rump?
Yellow rump? Do you think that's a yellow rump? I couldn't tell.
You kind of see the yellow right there.
Okay. Yeah, I've photographed some yellow rump warblers where I definitely know it is because he's got a big yellow spot right on his butt, but I couldn't really tell if that was or not. They have an area here, if you've been at the park here, you know this better than I do, where they've established native plantings. And right back over there, there's pine. It's kind of the sandhill, crane, pine, uplands, area. And there are gopher tortoises in there. And right now, I guess they're laying eggs and nesting, so they got areas roped off. So they're like, don't get too close. But with a 600 millimeter lens, I could spot a couple of them. And this guy looked like he'd been doing some recent excavation because he's got sand still on it. He just sat up there and watched me for a while. And he was sleepy too. I just had to wait for him to open his eye just enough so I could get a little bit of glint on his eye, And so that was my last stop back to where I got in my car and headed out here. But you had a question?
When will you shoot continuously besides birds in flight? Would you, for instance, if the bird is perched on a branch, would you shoot continuously just to get the bird before it flies?
So it's a good question, right? So when I first started with a digital SLR, the sort of the good camera, right? There's sort of default set so that as you squeeze the shutter, it focuses, and when it's in focus, it'll lock focus and it'll beep. And that was great comfort to me because I was like, okay, it's in focus, I can take a picture now. Problem with that is that it's locked focus. So now if the bird moves towards you, away from you, or goes away, it's still locked focus. So it's probably going to move out of the focus zone. So the camera I have now, in most good cameras that you buy have choices for multiple choices for all the different settings and things. But in terms of focus, you can set it for continuous focus. And the camera I have now is really responsive, right? And it seems like it's sharp all the time. It grabs focus. So I have a Sony, it's A7 IV, and the numbers don't mean anything to you, but it's a mirrorless camera, right? And it's really good in locking focus, catching focus. So I leave it in continuous focus all the time. So if the bird moves in front of me, or if it takes off, right? I try to leave my camera when I'm moving around from spot to spot. I have it set so that it's ready to capture action. So even if I'm just taking pictures of flowers and I'm done with these flowers, I'm going to go over here where I know some more flowers. I'll set the shutter speed for way more shutter speed than I need, and I'll look around and I'll find maybe a gray palm tree, and I'll focus on the tree and set my exposure, my shutter speed, and my f-stop so that that's gray middle tone is nicely exposed, and I have a fast enough shutter speed. So then if a bobcat or a deer or a bird comes by, I have enough shutter speed to stop that action, right? So even though I'm going to do flowers, which I might need 1/15 of a second, I've got the camera set for 1/12/50th, and I've got it on continuous focus, and I've got it on a high burst rate, because that's another thing that the cameras will let you do now, depending on what you have. I think mine will do 14 frames in a second, right? Which is really great if a bird's flying by, because their wings are up, wings are down, and you can't wait for that moment. All you can do is click, 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 and hope you catch it wings up and wings down. I don't like it when the wings are just level out. It looks long and skinny, and it's not nearly as attractive. So I just fire away. And so as I'm moving, I've got it set at least 1/12/50th, higher if there's more light, right? And I've done that with a trial exposure of a palm tree, probably. And I've got it on continuous focus, and I've got the focus area also set. You can have the focus area of your camera, just look at the little center point, or you can move the center point around, or you can expand it. Right? Lots of choices, right? So I usually have it expanded, so what's called zone. So it looks at pretty much anything in the middle. So then if something goes by real quick, I just point and shoot, hope for the best. But I've already got the exposure, and I've already got the shutter speed, and I've got the focus area kind of set so that I'm hoping I'll be lucky, if something happens like that. Yes, ma'am?
The kites that you're flying.
Yeah.
When you shoot up in the white background and white bird turns black. So how do I adjust my setting to shoot up, or should I not even bother?
So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So that's because you're letting the camera make the decisions, right? And your camera's going to go, your camera is set. It has the little meter in there, the exposure meter. It looks at everything in the frame. And he goes, there's a light spot and there's a dark spot. And it picks the midpoint. It looks for gray, right? So if you're looking at foliage where there's lots of branches and then maybe a deer and some leaves and some grass, there's lots of midtones in there, right? So the exposure meter works pretty good. But when you're looking up in the sky, it's a bright sky. Everything is bright except this little tiny bird. So it's going to tone that bright down to gray. It's going to turn to gray. So it's going to get darker and darker and darker, and so the bird is going to turn into a black dot. So what you do is, I'm going to photograph a swallowtail kite, and I know they're mostly white, so I look for a white sign, no parking. And I point my camera at the no parking sign, which is the same exposure value, and I set it perfectly. I set it for the shutter speed I want, which is at least 1/1250th. It's probably swallowtail kites faster. And then, so I've got maybe 1/1600th. Then I adjust the f-stop for the proper exposure for that white sign, and then expand the focus zone bigger, because if you have a bird flying, you can't possibly keep one little spot on the bird, so you expand it so at least some part of the bird will be in the focus zone. And then I just go out and fire away. And I don't care what the meter says anymore. I'm shooting in manual. I've decided what shutter speed. I've decided the f-stop. I've got the exposure. I've got the ISO, so the camera's not going to make any decisions for me. And then I just keep the sun behind me, and as long as the sun's on the bird, I don't have to do anything. Just try to keep it in the frame. But if you photograph an airplane or a balloon or anything in the sky, every bird is going to turn a black dot, because that's what your camera's supposed to do. It's supposed to look for the gray. The sky's going to be beautiful, all right? And it'll be a black dot in a beautiful sky. But you don't care about the sky. So let's lighten that exposure up so your bird's right. And the sky might turn white, right? But you don't care. Your bird's going to be perfectly exposed, right? And that's just what will happen. If it's a beautiful dark blue sky and the light's behind you and it's early or late in the evening when the sun isn't too bright, the sky and the bird can be nice, right? But you want your subject. So that happens a lot. That's another lesson I learned early on. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Rogers, thank you very much for this discussion. This is a question about screening out your photos after you've taken them. And let's say that somehow your equipment didn't perform the way you had thought it would, or perhaps there was just something about it that you just didn't like. That maybe your technique wasn't as good as it should have been, but you really loved what happened. How often does that happen, that you keep a picture in your collection that that doesn't have these things in it that you should have it, but you really love it? Does that happen very often?
Like every time I go out?
What?
Like every time I go out.
Does that happen?
I visited, there's a barred owl nest hole in Baldwin Park, the dog park. And the birds have fledged and they're not even in there anymore. But I went there the other day and one of the baby owls had branched. And, but it was not fledged. It wasn't comfortable flying. It just kind of sat there. And eventually the light was getting darker and darker and it was getting later and later. And I'm running out of light, right? I got the slowest possible shutter speed and high ISO, and I'm about to leave, and then the mom flew down and started grooming it, right? And then the baby's responding, and it was just this beautiful action, right? It's just so fun and so heartwarming to watch it. And I took 20 or so photos, but I knew they were no good because it was the ISO was too high and the pictures were too dark. But I took them anyway, and I took them home, and I tried to lighten them up as best I could, and I used shadows and highlights tool, and I still have them on my computer, but I've been slowly deleting them. And no one will ever see them because they're not up to my standards, and I'm not going to show. I'm just going to wait for the next moment when and I have some better photos of that same behavior, right? But you can't resist taking a photo. So there's two things you learn. One is don't take more photos than you care to sit down and process. Like when you first get a digital SLR, it's like, hey, these are free. I can take as many photos as I want, and they're free. It doesn't cost anything to process them. And I need to take a lot of photos because I don't want to miss anything. So you take 1 million photos, and then you have like one bird that you've taken 200 photos of. And now you have to figure out which one is the good one, right? So you have to look at 200 photos, and then you go like, oh, that one's pretty good. 20 photos later, you go, oh, that one's pretty good. I need to go back and look at it, see if it's better than, you can spend weeks doing that. So you get really good at perfecting your technique and being much more judicious about taking the photos. But it's always going to happen that stuff is going to present itself as a subject in conditions that aren't optimal, and you're just going to take some photos and you'll go back and look at them and go, some people say, oh, I got a record photo, right? They call it a record photo. They'll even post it. They're like, yeah, this is really crummy, but it's just a record photo. And I'm hoping for a better one, So if you're kind of like a collector and you want to have a picture of every bird, then you might have a crummy photo that you're just saving until you get a better one later or something. I don't know. It's a dilemma. You have to decide what's acceptable to you and what is good enough to share or to keep or whatever. But I'm mostly going for, I want spectacular photos that when I show them, people go, oh, that's really good, right? And I don't want people to just say, and you can't judge by Facebook, because everything you put on your Facebook, your friends go, oh, that's so good, you're so great, you should be on National Geographic, right? But yeah, I just like examine what other photos I really like, and then I try to aspire to that sort of level of expertise and beauty. And I'm looking to make beautiful photos, not just a photo of something, but a photo that meets all the things that I believe it should. So that's a long answer, and I just rambled a bit, but you just have to decide. You have to decide, is that good enough? Is that good enough to share? Maybe my friend who's a real Barred Owl fan will want to see those photos, and I might show them before I delete them. But in the end, that's what I typically end up doing. I'll take some photos, and then I'll go, all right, delete, and forget about it. Like they didn't exist, and don't worry about it, and go on for the next time. Yes, sir?
Can you recommend some locations in Northeast Florida?
Northeast. So Huguenot Beach. You ever been to Huguenot Beach? So birds are nesting there, shorebirds are nesting there, so that's a good spot. I don't go up that way a lot. The other place that, obviously is St. Augustine Alligator Farm, right? Have you been there?
St. Augustine?
Alligator Farm?
Yes.
Yeah, so it doesn't get a whole lot better than that. There's elevated boardwalk, there's a breeding marsh, there's all those birds nesting all around you. So that's a really good spot. If you go Anastasia Island, there's pretty wide sand beaches there, and you can park at the state park and walk up further north, and it's like 2 or 3 miles. But as you get some distance from the parking lot, the crowd's thin out. There's nobody, and then there's shorebirds and pelicans and nesting shorebirds sometimes. You just have to do that, realize, well, that's an East Coast, so that would be, an evening shoot. So the disadvantage is you walk up 3 miles and it'll be dark and you got to walk back down, But that's a place that I've had some luck in, and least terns will nest there, and Wilson's plovers nest there, and so you can get some nesting birds, and oyster catchers sometimes. That's really all I could say about Northeast Florida. Yes, ma'am.
So when you're sharing photos online, do you have any challenges with copyright type of issues where people might use your pictures and say that it's their own, or do you not care about that?
So at some point, really not all that long ago, I started putting my signature on the photos that I post online, and I put them in a corner somewhere, and generally where it'd be hard to clone them to get rid of it without cropping it or whatever. But the main thing that will prevent you from having to deal with people really making money off your photos is to post them at a resolution that's not high enough to be used in a print publication, right? So if you're going to submit to a contest or to a magazine or something like that, typically you need like 8x10 at 300 dpi. That's kind of the minimum, right? So then when I put them online, I use like 5x7 at 96 or 120. So it's a way lower resolution. So no one can take that picture and submit it to a print publication. And plus they don't have the raw file, right? They don't have the original file, which most, So if someone wants to steal it and put it on their Instagram or their Facebook and say they did it, well, good for them. I feel sorry for them. I don't worry about it. They're not taking any money out of my pocket, right? I guess that happens and people get all worked up over it, like, oh, they stole my photo, I saw it there, and I'm like, well, whatever. I don't worry too much about it. But yeah, posting at a lower resolution, enough so that it looks good, but not high enough so that it can be used. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have already learned so much stuff. I'm going to throw out the 5,000 images I shot and try all again. I love that you showed all these locations, but there was one area you didn't show, or maybe that's the next part of the slide. Since we live in Florida, we have lots of just local parks, retention ponds, urban environments where there's a lot of action going on. I know there's a retention pond near me where there are mergansers and wood ducks and all that stuff. Do you wander around on occasion and look at these kind of things?
So, you know what I said in the beginning about research, right? So you can get in your car and drive around and look at every retention pond in town. And as you do that, that will take hours, and the light's only good for like an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half at night. So you could like scout, right? But here's what I do. I get on Facebook, and I just look at everybody else's photos. If there's a place where there's a merganser, hooded mergansers, and they're on a retention pond, somebody's going to put that online, right? So you can look at, and especially the well-known places, right? But if you go to places like, there's a Facebook page, Birding in Florida, and there's a Facebook page, Florida Birds, and there's a Facebook page, Birds in Flight, right? So you can just search Facebook for those types of topics, find the pages, and then look where they went, right? There's a guy that lives in Oviedo, and he takes a lot of pictures in his backyard, but he has found hooded mergansers in a pond in front of like an orthopedic, office off of a Loma, and he's the one that posted hooded mergansers, and I said, I just posted, oh, that's so great, that's really nice, and a lot of times people are protective of their locations. They don't want to share them, but he wasn't that way at all. He was in his post saying, oh, this is at this address, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool, great photo, and thanks so much. So when's a good time to go over there? And so I went over there. In fact, I went over there one day and was watching the birds, and he came and saw me and took a picture of me watching the birds that he had posted. But so my point is, social media and the internet will save you. You can do the same sort of prospecting, and you can do a lot wider range, right? And that's kind of what I do. I don't very often just go out and say, well, let me just look for new places. If I'm at a place that's further away, like if I go to Fort Myers Beach and I know a couple places that I really like, then I'll go to those places. But then, I'll wander around and look for other places further abroad. When I go to Jover Street Road, you can drive up and down that road, but there's plenty of other roads there, and there's other lakes there. So, I'll do some prospecting. But to just get in my car and take my gear and go out and say, I hope I find something that will make, be good for, I don't do that, too much.
I want to add to that question, because you can find it or you can make it. And in 2004, the property that you're on right now was an invasive plant landfill mess. The birders knew that this was also on the flight path for the migration. And since then, citizens in Winter Park, with the cooperation of the city, we had city commissioner here just a minute ago, and we are following the advice of the Native Plant Society and the Audubon to remove the invasives and plant the things that birds need. So we had one swallowtail kite nest last year when Leslie Poole did her opening for the book that she just wrote, the Rollins professor. We're sitting over there, and here's this swallowtail. And nobody's listening to the speaker because they're all watching the bird. And now this year we have 2 additional kite nests because the city didn't take the pine trees all down that are 200-year-old pines. They cut them at the top, they're dead. But now we have these 40-foot dead pine things that, you know, your decorative people wouldn't have approved, but nor would they have thought of. But now there's a what do they call that?
Snag.
No, it's a snag, but it has a nest in it of the
Oh.
bird that you just took a picture of. That
Barred owl?
The flicker, the
The yellow rump warbler?
no.
What are we talking about?
Oh
here?
yeah, the warbler's corner. It's that woodpecker. With the
Oh, pileated woodpecker. Mhm. Yeah,
pileated.
right,
Thank you.
right.
So that's the purpose of this botanical garden. It's Mead Botanical Garden. And we're putting the botanical back, and to be a botanical garden, you have to have a collection, and you can define what the collection is. So we are taking the entire south quarter, and it's being restored by the Native Plant Society to have the plants that that critter can eat. Because that's the prime critter for over 100 species use those tunnels that they make to hide in during fire and different things. So we're just welcoming that gopher tortoise and putting the plants that they would normally have found here 100 years ago. So that is there. So we're creating places so that a photographer can come and say, oh, let's do the owls, and let's do the pileated woodpecker, and let's do all these warblers, and let's do the mottled ducks. We got mottled ducks, and we have wood ducks, and we have all of that, but it's an intentional volunteer effort. We have the executive director, that's Cindy, and we have the program person, Emily, that opened for us, and we have probably 80 or 100 volunteers who show up here twice or 3 times a week in order to pull weeds and put native plants back in. So, thank you.
And you know, you can do that in your yard. When I got here, I was trying to plant tropical stuff, and it was silly, and it was dying every winter. And then as I got smarter and smarter and learned more about it, I tore all that stuff out. I've got American beautyberry and, you know, just native plants, you know, firebush. And so I have hummingbirds and butterflies and wildlife. I live in a subdivision, but the whole backyard looks kind of overgrown and jungly, and it's full of good stuff, right? And I don't have to water it and don't fertilize it.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm retired now from my teaching job. I just like go out and have fun doing nature and doing stuff like this once in a while. But I do workshops, and if you're at all interested in going out with me, whatever your level of expertise is, you know, I offer like custom workshops. Sometimes I do little group workshops. I can give you a card and you can think about it. And I'm not like a big business guy and not trying to advertise, make a ton of money. I just like to go out with people and share photography and take you to places that you might not know about, so I can put you in the right place at the right time where you can get some good photo opportunities. So that's something I do. So if that interests you at all, then give me a holler afterwards. I'll stick around for a few minutes and we can talk. Any more questions about anything?
Can we give them a round of applause?